Hello and welcome back to Stork'd. I am introducing for the first episode of season 6, Jodi Klaristenfeld. Jodi's a really special episode because, as you'll hear her share her story, Jodi suffered from preeclampsia when she was pregnant with her daughter. What preeclampsia is, it's a life-threatening illness that many pregnant people experience. And in Jodi's case, it was life-threatening. I mean, had she not caught it at the time she did and not gotten raced to the hospital when she was raced to the hospital, either she or her baby or both would not have survived. From there, Jodi's daughter, born early, ended up in the NICU. And Jodi, scrambling to find resources, ended up creating an organization called FLRRRiSH, which helps parents whose babies are currently in the NICU or kids who have ever been in a NICU to get the resources that they need to thrive, to flourish. Why am I picking an episode about near-death experience and the NICU experience as the first kickoff episode of season 6? It's really important, and that is because the infant and maternal mortality rates in the US are the highest of any developed nation. Let me just say that as bluntly as possible. This means our moms and our babies die more here in the US. It's just unacceptable. And so by hearing this near-death experience and then what the beautiful organization that came from it, I'm hoping to showcase a lot of things. I'm hoping to showcase the way we evolve as people. You're going to hear Jodi talk about her medical trauma and her trauma of going through this experience. It shapes whether or not our babies live to get to the point where they need extra services and be supported in their growth trajectories. It shapes the way in which our kids may experience their lives, their childhood, and the relationship we may have with our significant other. I mean, it shapes so many things, this one moment in time. The other reason I'm sharing this is nearly 15% of all children in the US are in the NICU at some point. So no matter how your family journey goes, you might be adopting, you might be fostering, you might have gone the perfectly traditional way and just, try number 1 or 2, got knocked up naturally. Those people who are going through IVF are like rolling their eyes and laughing. Maybe that's how it happened for you. And yet there's a 15% chance that your baby might be born premature and end up in the NICU. So I think this is a really important kickoff episode for season 6. If you love it, if you love this episode, do me a favor, share it with a friend. It's really important that you share this episode in particular because in it, Jodi gives some warning signs for what to look for preeclampsia. So if you have a pregnant friend or you know somebody who's thinking about having a baby, this is an episode to share with them just to be on the lookout for some of those warning signs. The other reason to share it with a friend is because you never know who could benefit from a Stork'd story. And therefore, I ask that you follow us on Instagram, sign up for the newsletter, Let's Start a Family, which is on Substack. Like, rate, review, all those things help get Stork'd out into the world. I hope you love this episode and I hope you love this season. Welcome to season 6 of Stork'd. Jodi, welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we explore the many ways to build and define family. I am so excited to learn more about your story. If we could dive right in, can you share with our audience who you are and what it is you're trying to create?
Hi, Julia. I am Jodi Klaristenfeld. And let me first start by saying I'm stoked to be on the Stork'd podcast and
I love that alliteration.
And just share all about me and flourish and what I'm trying to do in the world. I am a mom. I am a wife. I am an entrepreneur. And I started my company FLRRRiSH, which is a platform to educate, support, and empower preemie and NICU families on their journey through the NICU and beyond out of what I felt was missing from mine and my husband's journey when my daughter was born 12 weeks early a few years ago. We felt so alone and isolated and confused, and we didn't know where to turn. We didn't have anyone that we knew that had had a baby born early, and we didn't even know where to look because sometimes Dr. Google can be more detrimental than helpful. And so I created what I wish I had when we were in the thick of our journey. And even now still, as I'm still journeying on my motherhood.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to dive in a little bit about FLRRiSH and what it is you offer. I think it's really important. And then also to hear your story. I'm hearing these words. I felt alone. I felt like I didn't have resources. I felt like I had to turn to Dr. Google. I mean, those are really scary things. And what's really surprising to me is you're not the only person I've heard say, I felt alone whenever it comes to family building journey, but specifically if there's something medical going on. And that feels like a huge failure of our medical institution to support families, pregnant parents, birthing parents. I mean, there's just this hole in the way that we support people around bringing children into this world. Let's talk about the experience you had in having a preemie child. Can you bring us back to those days?
Sure. But first, I want to say I completely agree with you. There is this huge break in the system. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to help create noise about with FLRRiSH. But let me start back with my experience. I had the easiest 28 weeks and the hardest 4 days of pregnancy. I had no idea really that things went wrong, so wrong that they were deadly. If I didn't give birth when I did, my OB said that we would have lost myself and my daughter. But the beauty in that is that I didn't know how sick I was, so I didn't really have time to panic. I was sick and out of it, and that kind of shielded me from the panic. But I had HELLP syndrome and preeclampsia. Now, preeclampsia is very well known, and the Journal of American Medicine just came out with a big study about preeclampsia. And now there's a new blood test that can help detect, in some cases, if there is a higher incidence of possibility of preeclampsia, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm so excited about. But preeclampsia is an increased elevation in your blood pressure. Now, normal is really anything 125 over 80, 85. But when you have preeclampsia, and also it's important to note when you are pregnant, your blood pressure is generally a little bit elevated because you're beating for two and your body is working for two people. So it's doing more work. So obviously, it's going to put a little bit more strain on your heart. But preeclampsia is a huge increase. I had my blood pressure, I think, was something like 190 over 150, which is near stroke and seizure levels. But again, didn't even realize that I had that. And so moms out there, if you're listening, if you notice in yourself that you have an increase in swelling in your hands and your feet, and your face. And also if you start to hurt on the right side of your back and the upper body and towards your shoulders, or you start to feel dizzy or have headaches, please, please, please go to the doctor. I really didn't have any of those symptoms except for the swelling. But prior to those like 4 or 5 days, I had only gained 6.5 pounds through my whole pregnancy. So I really thought that it was kind of catching up with me now that I had hit the 3rd trimester.
So you're starting to feel some things in your body and you're thinking, well, this makes sense because I haven't gained that much weight and, I'm supposed to gain weight. So maybe this is just not like a linear progression, but sort of a leapfrog or something. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. And being pregnant my first time, I really didn't have anything else to compare it to. And I didn't feel headaches, I didn't feel dizzy, I didn't feel any of the other things. So that was one indication. When my preeclampsia actually elevated to HELLP syndrome, which stands for basically like your lipids, your liver, all your blood indicators are out of whack. And there could be kidney damage and it could turn deadly. My urine turned orange the day before. Wow. And the morning of my daughter's birth, I started to see double. And those are huge signs of HELLP syndrome that can turn deadly. I walked into my OB's office that day at 12:30. He immediately took one look at me, took my blood pressure, and said, "We're going to the hospital and we're not going to leave until we have this baby." And I was so confused. And again, so sick. I didn't even understand what was happening.
So you're going into your doctor's appointment thinking, I'm not feeling great. And he tells you you're going to the hospital. What would have happened had you not taken agency and said, I think I need to see a doctor?
I wouldn't be here today, and nor would my daughter.
Oh my gosh. That just sent like a chill down my spine. And the reason I'm pressing on this is, as you well know, so often as women, we are afraid to call the doctor because, there's somebody who is the expert. They should know what's going on with our bodies. And particularly if you're a first time mom, you don't know whether what you're feeling is normal or not normal. And so sometimes your intuitive voice, the one that says, I don't know, this doesn't feel quite right, can get overridden by logic or by Dr. Google or by, calling a nurse. And the nurse is like, it's fine. So your inner voice is saying it's not fine. And you acted on that and that saved your life.
Yes. And I do want to point out one other thing, one other symptom of HELLP syndrome, which is extremely important, is that I had a bloody nose that wouldn't stop. And that's where you lose the P part of the HELLP syndrome is the platelets. Your platelets go down really, really low. So I was bleeding and I couldn't stop it. And I went to an ENT who I guess should have taken my blood pressure, but didn't. And he cauterized my nose. So he helped stop the bleeding. But again, this was a sign of a really serious issue. And I did tell that to my OB, obviously, when I did see him, but I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. And if you're over 40 as well, which I am, and I was at the time, that also gives you a slight increased risk of developing both preeclampsia and HELLP syndrome.
It's upsetting to me that you saw a doctor and they didn't bother checking your blood pressure. They didn't bother saying, wait a minute, this symptom could be linked to something related to the pregnancy and we should check that.
And I went to a reputable doctor on Park Avenue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. It's not like I, went into a basement somewhere of someone that didn't practice medicine, right? I went to a reputable person, or what I thought was, and it didn't even occur to them. And of course, it didn't occur to me.
And what was the feeling like when your doctor looked you in the face and said, we're going to the hospital?
I was completely confused and out of it. Like I said, I had no idea how sick I really, really was. I couldn't understand because she wasn't due for another 12 weeks. Why was I going? And he even took blood. And he goes, okay, carry this to the hospital because I want to have it checked immediately. Meanwhile, I think they then did it when I was at the hospital as well. And it didn't even occur to me until about 2 years later that now my husband was in Europe. So again, she came 12 weeks early. Fortunately, my mother was in town. We were going to look at baby furniture and things like that you do right beforehand, not knowing that we were going to have the baby. And literally, I said to my mom, something that I just remembered? We walked into the hospital the day Dana was born, and we didn't even have to wait for an elevator. We didn't stop on any other floor. You just said, hi, I'm Jodi. And they're like, go. Like, that was it. And my mom's like, yes, because they knew you were coming. They had a special elevator, right, that went for emergencies, literally went right up to the labor and delivery floor. And literally 2 hours later, my daughter was born. And I met her 3 days after that.
That's how serious this condition is. And we've had women with preeclampsia on this podcast who have shared different results. I've had friends who've gone through it, and it is exceedingly scary. I mean, this is not something to take lightly by any means.
No, I mean, for myself, I was a wreck for the next, I'll say 5 to 6 months. I was a wreck on so many levels, but even more so because I had to keep checking my blood pressure. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. Before having had my daughter, I actually erred on the low side, like 95 over 65. And now, even to this day, whenever I have my blood pressure taken, I get so nervous. It brings me back to those moments. And there's actually a name for it. It's called white coat syndrome that a lot of people have because you get nervous when you go to the doctor. It's very common. But for me, I had to check my blood pressure so often, and I was taking pills and regulating the pills. And sometimes I would feel dizzy from the pills, and sometimes I would be off the wall. It was just trying to regulate that, plus my hormones, plus my daughter was in the NICU. And it is scary because I think you don't really realize how your heart, I mean, everyone knows your heart is what fills your body, right? And that's why we're breathing. That's why we're living. But I think until something actually happens that could affect that in some way, you don't really think about it.
This is a sort of a weird non sequitur, but I was reading a book about giraffes recently to a child who was interested in giraffes. And the statistic they gave was that giraffes have 2-foot hearts. Think about like how big 2 feet is, because they need to pump blood all the way to the top of the head and back, and these long necks. And okay, that makes sense logically. I'm in my 40s and I've got advanced degrees, but I never really thought about how much your heart needs to work for the structure of your body and how hard, like that your brain needs that oxygen flow, et cetera. And it was one of those moments I literally was like, wow, you forget how important and amazing a heart is until a moment like this. And the heart is not just a muscle that carries blood and oxygen and keeps us alive. It's also a muscle that carries emotions, and it carries memories, and it carries, some of these esoteric things live in the heart space, psychologically, spiritually, and in actuality. What does it feel like now to carry around the trauma of having to deliver early as a result of a near-death experience?
First and foremost, I just feel so grateful because I know our story could have been very different. My OB said to my mom, Linda, if we don't take the baby now, we are going to lose them both. And then in the next breath said, and if I have to choose, who should I choose?
And your mom had to make that
My
decision.
mom had to make that decision. My husband was in Europe. And my mom, to me, I thought she looked calm. She said she was anything but. And I don't even think anyone expects when they themselves are pregnant, or even if you're a parent and your child is pregnant or your grandchild is pregnant, I don't think anyone expects to have to answer a question like that, or to have someone say, we'll lose them both if we don't do it now. I'm
getting very emotional listening to this and imagining how I might choose. What did your mom say?
My mom said me. My mom said me. And I would venture to say probably most parents would. I don't know. And that goes back to my gratitude, is that because I know our story could have been very different. And I am so thankful to my OB, who was the picture of calm, cool, and collected. And to all the doctors and the nurses, the labor and delivery, the NICU staff, I am forever grateful. And I can't say thank you enough or ever do enough for them, because they saved our lives. That said, there still is trauma. There's still even little things now, years later, when I walk around and I see infants in their strollers, I think to myself how I miss some of those moments. Or even when I speak to other moms and I listen to their trauma. And now I was knocked out, like I said, completely. And I didn't meet my daughter for 3 days. But I think to myself often, well, did I ask for her in those days? I was hallucinating off the magnesium they were giving me. They were giving me platelets as they were taking her because they didn't know if my blood would clot, if I'd need a hysterectomy, if anything. And I was out of it literally for 3 days. And then I remember saying to my OB, there's something really, really wrong with me. I said, I met my daughter last night. I said two things. One, I was scared to hold her, and I didn't in that moment. I was too scared because of all the apparatus and myself. It was the first time I was walking after having had the surgery and everything, and walking into the NICU is very difficult. And I said, but I don't feel bonded to her. I don't feel maternal in this moment. I think there's something wrong. There's something really, really wrong with me. And he gave me the best advice. And this is what I tell all women that I speak to is that, first of all, over 20% of women don't feel instantaneously bonded to their child the minute they have them. I mean, we're programmed to think that a light switch goes off once you give birth. But that is just not the case, right? You don't feel like yourself. You don't understand still what happened. You're processing your whole childbirth, or now that you're responsible for this other person and you're hormonal. But in my case, also, I was trying to understand what even happened. I didn't even know what happened. And he said to me, he's like, give yourself a break. The fact that you're asking means what I already know about you is that you're a wonderful mom. He said, and what's more, you have to process and fully understand what happened to you before you can show up and be there for your child. And you will feel bonded with her. When you hold her that first time, he goes, I am telling you, you will. And he was so right on all of it. The first time I held her, I just felt like we were both in the place we were supposed to be. And she was my home and I was hers. And amidst all the chaos, I did feel that. But the trauma has stayed in various parts. And I think it's one of those things that you learn how to process and deal with certain instances, and also know that there are things that might be triggers for you.
It strikes me as it's such a multi-layered trauma because there's the trauma of confronting your own mortality and having nearly not made it. And then there's the trauma of like processing all the medical stuff that you went through. And then there's the trauma of what you witness your daughter go through, which we'll talk about in a minute. I mean, it's just so much to hold at once. Of course, it's going to live with you as you continue on your life.
And everyone takes their own timeline, right? And I think it's important to note to everyone out there is that there's no set time. You shouldn't just get over it because people think you should, or you shouldn't just get over it the minute your child comes home from the NICU, because it's that much scarier once your child does come home from the NICU. There are so many things I think that people who just don't know, and it's not because they're trying to be mean, or it's just that they don't know, and you don't know what you don't know. So someone who has not gone through that experience can't begin to understand all the crazy confluence of events and the roller coaster of emotions that you are going through.
Oh, for sure. For somebody who's listening, can you name some of those emotions for us?
Well, I said some earlier, isolation, confused, mom guilt was huge. Even still, sometimes to this day, when we go for a checkup or we go to a special doctor and I read things and I listen to them, it still comes back to me. What did I do that made her be born early? Now, I know that there's nothing that I did, but cognitively, there's like a disconnect in my brain somewhere that is still somehow goes back to that place. But that said, I do know how to pick myself up and move forward from that. And I think everyone has mom guilt to some degree. It's hard not to, but I will just say, just feeling confused, alone, unsupported. Again, that goes to not having a friend or family member or a place to go to get help, to find maybe other moms who have been through a similar situation. And also really, really guilty and really, really sad.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear that in your story. And I can relate to it as a parent. The mom guilt is so real and it comes from these shoulds. I should be home with my kid. I should be paying full attention to them when we're playing and not answering the phone. I should have carried the term. I should have whatever, these externalities that we internalize. And for me, the isolation, I was in a different position from you because I was fully prepared to be isolated as a solo mom, right? So I was structurally thinking my life is going to be one with isolation. And so I have to do everything I can to combat it. And I was given the time to create those structures for myself. You weren't expecting to be isolated. You weren't expecting to have a medical emergency, and you were not expecting to deliver at 28 weeks. So you were thrust into this without the resources, without the safety net.
And also thrust into being almost a medical parent, getting a degree without ever having gone to medical school. There's so many acronyms and names and phrases that are constantly thrown at you, and trying to parse through that and what that means. And also, I would say, too, one of the hardest things for me to process was, okay, this is my motherhood journey. How do I reframe what I thought it was going to be and what it now is? And that also was very difficult for me. But at the same time, I just kept saying to myself, this isn't about you. This is about your daughter. Put her first. Put her first. Also, all the while, thankfully, I had a great support system and my husband saying, Jodi, go get your nails done. Go for lunch with your friends. Go and do something for you, right? Because you need to balance that. Everything is for my child versus doing stuff for yourself. Because if you're always giving and not filling your own cup, then you're running on empty and then you'll have nothing to give.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that strikes me as being in contrast with the great advice your doctor gave you, which is heal yourself first so you can be a mom. So it's take care of yourself so that you can parent well. And then the advice you're giving yourself, which is put her first, which you sort of have to do because she's in the NICU and then has some medical needs. Those two things are in conflict. You want to show up fully for your child, but you need to show up fully for yourself and heal your body, heal your trauma. That's a lot.
Yes. And also, I might add, showing up for myself made me feel guilty. I remember going to get my nails done while my daughter was in the NICU and thinking the whole time that this is such a luxurious experience. Why am I doing this when she is in the hospital fighting for her life? The juxtaposition, but it is remarkable. But at the same time, it is just emblematic of the entire process, because you could be so happy 1 minute and then 2 seconds later, not even, something could go really, really wrong. Or you could be sitting with your child on your chest doing skin to skin. This happens quite often. And she would have an apnea episode and wouldn't be breathing. And so all the bells and the whistles would go off and the doctors and the nurses would come and start banging on her back. I mean, that also is traumatizing. How do you know that's not going to happen when she comes home? You don't.
Yeah. So we're talking a little bit about what was going on in your hospital room and in your heart and your emotions. Let's pivot and talk about what was happening for your daughter in those 3 days, the 3 days when you were not quite with it and were getting healed by the medical staff, and then the remaining time in the NICU and then beyond. Can you tell me a little bit about her journey?
Yeah, I will say this. She was in the NICU for 77 days. She came home 3 days before her due date. And fortunately, aside from some minor hiccups, she did really, really well. And I credit, again, the doctors and the nurses who treated her and treat all babies that are in the NICU like their own. It is because of them that you can go home at night. How difficult it is for you to actually leave your child at the hospital while you go home. I also credit the fact that my husband and I did kangaroo care, skin to skin, with her for probably on average 8 hours or more a day. And I think that really helped. There are studies that show that how much that simulates be as close to being inside the womb as possible. And I like to say the added bonus is that dads or partners get to do that too, because otherwise the baby would be inside the mom and the dad wouldn't get that time with their child. So I think that, and also just science in general, we live in a time and a place where there's amazing medical advances and all those bells and whistles and things that were alarming to me and scary to me helped us in so very many ways on a daily basis. I remember when we were going to go home the next day and Jenna graduated from the NICU and they took off her monitors because we were going down to the pediatric floor. We were leaving the NICU. And I remember.
That sounds like a very exciting, but maybe really scary moment.
Yes. I was crying hysterically, both happiness and like tears of like sadness and trepidation, right? And that, because we were about to take her home and she was doing so well. And I just thanked all of those people there because I know she felt the love because I felt the love they gave her. And yes, like I said, there were some hiccups, but I don't think people understand how hard it is to do on the outside world, what it is that most babies do on the inside. Even something as simple as learning to suck, swallow, and breathe so that they can eat from a bottle or from a nipple or from breast. I mean, that in and of itself was also a very difficult and challenging experience. But people, myself included, take that for granted. And I did until I watched my daughter have to learn how to do it on the outside world, where normally that's learned around like 36 weeks, 35, 36 weeks. So I had to watch her do it on the outside and learn all of that.
It's amazing. People used to tell me you're never going to be the same once you become a parent or just wait until you become a parent. And I don't believe that mostly, with one exception, is that I don't think I ever really appreciated my body and the way in which we humans develop until I was carrying a child and I was lucky. I was seeing those developmental milestones through an app and not by witnessing my child do them in the NICU. But, that was just so mind blowing to me that our bodies can create and teach this. And the miracle of science is that we can somewhat replicate that if we need to.
I also have a huge appreciation for growth and development, even through the years after, right? Just watching my daughter learn and process all those things.
So you mentioned that your daughter, watching her through developmental milestones. Can you tell us a little bit about her life post NICU and the way it feels to parent post NICU a NICU baby?
Yes. And that was actually, again, part of the impetus for Flourish, and why I call it Flourish is that when I would watch Jenna with her therapist all the time, I would always say, wow, she's progressing nicely. She's flourishing. She's developing. She's flourishing. And my grandfather always said to me, Jodi, we learn something new every day. We're always growing every single day. And the day we don't is the day, unfortunately, we're not here anymore. And that stuck with me, juxtaposition to my daughter flourishing and developing. And since I always felt like it was my life's work to work on myself and to learn about myself, and here I was watching her, and it is now my life's work too to watch her grow and develop, therein came the name Flourish.
I love that.
We had more doctor's appointments than most typical babies, including one where she was born with a hole in between the left and right side of her heart in that main ventricle. And thankfully at 18 months, it closed up. So we went and we saw a lot of doctors, and most of those have fallen by the wayside, which is fantastic. But we did have to start up with early intervention and getting her therapy right away. Now, most people would say, well, what kind of therapy, myself included? What possibly could a 4-month-old who's supposed to be 1 month old be doing, and what should we be teaching them? And again, that goes to the feeling of confusion, not knowing where to go. How do I get my child's help to set them up for success for later on down the road, for whatever success looks like for you? And so we were given a team through the city. And the first person I met, I did not like. She was, I want to say, a glorified bean counter, no disrespect. But she said to me, well, I have 28 days to file this paperwork. So I will file it probably on the 27th or the 28th day. And I said, no, you won't. And she said, well, why not? I have that. I said, well, these days and months are pivotal to my daughter's growth and development. You will not take this much time. And she's like, well, I have that much time. I go, well, then this is not going to work. And I had to go, I went to, I guess it's called our EIOD, the person who was in charge of her. And I said, listen, this is not going to work. This woman wants to do nothing and be lazy when it's my daughter's future is on the line. And I then curated a team for her through getting all the phone numbers that I could and looking things up to try and get us the PT, the OT, and the speech to get her on the road. But the issue is there's so much paperwork and there's so much, I want to say, bureaucracy, right? Even though she pre-qualified for absolutely everything, we had to get her evaluated. After the evaluations, then there had to be paperwork, then there had to be a meeting, then there had to be this. And so all the while time was passing and I didn't want to wait. So I started up with some private therapies for her, because at least then someone could help me and tell me what I should or should not be doing, what to look out for. I didn't read any books because I didn't want to read about milestones that my daughter wouldn't hit. That would make me feel even more fragile than I already felt and more guilty than I already felt. And I didn't want to just even look at those benchmarks at all, because it would, to me, I internalized that as my failure. And meanwhile, she works harder than anyone that I know, even still to this day. So I quickly learned, I'm a resourceful person. I quickly learned how to navigate that whole system. I'm not going to say it's easy, because it's not. And it became a job in and of itself to get.
And you have some privileges that other people don't have. For instance, you're a native English speaker. And if you are not a native English speaker, it becomes that much harder to navigate paperwork. Some people have to work 2 full-time jobs in order to make ends meet. They don't have the time to file the paperwork, or they have to work during the hours that you have to get to the office to file it, or you could go to the private route. And as I understand Flourish, some of all this chutzpah you're putting into pulling these resources together, you're helping other people do as well.
Yes, that's one of the things I felt really strongly about and still do is, like I said, setting your child up for success, whatever that is, and putting them in the right situation. And one of the ways to do that is to get them the help that they need. So what I have tried to do was make this large database broken down state by state, county by county. I've only done 30 so far, 30 of 50 states, but it's a labor of love. and it does take a very long time. So everything is up to date with contact information, websites, the types of services they offer, if they do have take early intervention or CPSE. And there's also private people in there as well. And to me, what took me months to do for my daughter, I would have loved for someone to just say, well, if you could just have this list, if I could buy a list to do that, have someone who done that work for me, I would have done it. I would have paid anything for it. And so that's part of what Flourish offers, is all those specialists broken down state by state, county by county. There's also what I love to think, I call it the preemie parent journeys. They're 20 stories. They're 3 to 5 minute long. And they're just stories of positivity of myself and other NICU parents who have been through the thick of it. And maybe you need to hear some positive reinforcement, right? I would have loved to have heard a story of anyone else that has gone through the NICU and their child now is doing wonderful. I didn't know any success stories, and I would have grasped at anything that was positive other than what a doctor or a nurse was telling me. I think it's important to hear it from a peer level, because there's more validity, in my opinion, to that, because that person has gone through it with their child. The overall messages are the same, is that you are not alone. You're supported. There are tons of us out here, and you're so strong. Don't forget how strong you are. And don't forget that everyone's growth and development, whether preterm or full term, is different. There's a bell curve in everything, and not everyone can come in first place. And we're so caught up on milestones and these benchmarks. When I tell people, and I do this for myself, I think in small incremental steps, right? That makes the task much more manageable and doesn't seem as daunting.
And I just saw a meme on Instagram, pardon me, but I loved it so much that I saved it on my phone, and it's an image of a staircase, and it says, if you try to take the whole staircase at once, you're never going to make it. You're never going to climb. But if you take it step by step, you can get there, right? And it's important to just take it in digestible chunks, whatever you can handle in front of you in the moment.
Yes. Because you know what? I think sometimes when you look too far ahead, it's scary and you think, how am I ever going to get there? I could easily bring it back to myself when the doctors and nurses said, well, figure that your daughter will be here until around her due date. And I go, but that's 3 months from now. That's never going to get here. That's forever. Yeah. And sure enough, here we are years later. That's one of the beautiful things that being a preemie mom has taught me, is that to enjoy every step of the journey even more. And we cheer our daughter on for absolutely everything. And it's actually cute because now she cheers her friends on whenever it is that they're doing things. And I can't help but think that it's because we're always applauding her.
You are so good at anticipating my questions. One of the questions I was going to ask next is, how has the NICU experience and your own traumatic medical experience informed how you parent? Has it changed your parenting style? And it sounds like this cheerleading is one way in which your parenting style is maybe different from a different parent.
You know, I only know this style of parenting because of how Jenna was born, and I love it, and I wouldn't change it for anything, because it makes me appreciate so much that I don't know necessarily that I would have had the appreciation for had she not been born this way.
So I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. The first is related to the Flourish client base. Are you seeing some themes or trends in what people are begging you for, needing from you, requesting?
Mostly, you know, it's what I expected is, again, just feeling alone and not knowing where to turn. How does someone get help? And a lot of self-blame, which we had talked about prior. But I also noticed too that sometimes parents, and I help them do this, kind of get out of their own way. That's what I mean by reframing their mindset in terms of, okay, so if your child isn't doing this and needs extra love and extra support, get them the extra love and support. Find out how you can get them the extra love and support. There's nothing wrong with that. There should be no stigma with that. And we live in a society where everyone has to sort of fit in the box, but truthfully, most people fit outside of the box. You know, we live in a gray world. We're not polar, black or white. But at the same time, we're taught that you have to check a certain box. And this journey has taught me that most people don't. And I see the beauty in that because each child is unique and each one's story is unique. And I try to impart that wisdom on the parents that I speak to. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, as opposed to looking at it as the glass half empty, I choose to look at it as the glass half full.
It's such a valuable reminder wherever you are in your life, whether it's around your family building journey or around your career choices, or in my case, your relationships, or the way in which your child is developing, that the box is so prescriptive and it doesn't fit most of us.
Yes. And it's I'll say almost shameful that that's how we live and how things are glorified, right? Especially through social media and social channels like that for most people, that is not the reality. And
it's true.
But yet we uphold ourselves to those standards when we really shouldn't, because we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment.
That's true. Thank you for that. Having gone through this experience yourself, reframing your journey into parenting, and the work that you do with all the other parents who turn to you for coaching, support, resources, this incredible list you've cultivated, stories, how has that shaped your definition of family?
You know, I think I always knew that it took a village when having a family, but even more so now, I consider everyone who helps us out family. Like I said before, with our early intervention specialists, when Jenna aged out, I cried. And they were so instrumental, not only in the support to my daughter, but to myself and to my husband and to our caregiver, Miranda. They helped us just as much, if not more, as helping our daughter. So I think it just reinforced and expanded my definition of what it takes to who your family is and what it means by when people say it takes a village, because our village is quite large and I love it that way.
That's wonderful. So we've talked a lot about the journey to build Flourish, and it's sort of interwoven with your daughter's birth. It was inspired by, but also you were creating it as you were getting her services and as she's grown up. So the two stories are so enmeshed. It's incredible. If we are curious to learn more about Flourish, if we are currently going through a NICU medical child experience, or our kid has been in the NICU and we might need additional resources, where do we find you?
People can find me on the web, www.FLRRiSH.com. That's FLRRISH.com. They can also use the same on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, and they can also email me hello@FLRRiSH.com. And that's again, FLRRISH.com. And, you know, any person that comes my way, I always talk to them first for about 20 minutes before anything, just to get a barometer of where they're at. And then, you know, we'll just go from there. And even if someone you know is struggling that maybe doesn't know about me or doesn't know about Flourish and doesn't even want to Google, maybe you could, as a friend, you could give them my information as well.
I think that's so important. The other thing I ask you to do is if you've listened to this episode and you've taken note of the various symptoms around preeclampsia, please pay attention to that in your own body or anyone else you know who's carrying a baby, because it could save a life.
Yes, and it could be yours. And all I can say is if something doesn't feel right to you, go to the doctor. Even if someone's like, no, it's just fine, go to the doctor.
I agree 100%. Well, thank you, Jodi. It is a pleasure to talk to you. And I know that this episode will help a number.
I felt like I could have talked to you for like another hour.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.